Reverend Lynn Fritz married my wife and I.
Thank you, Craig. Wonderful sound, isn't it? Don't you love that? Yes. Yes. Good morning. So good to see you all. So as we begin, I just want to share a couple of tidbits with you. It kind of stresses the importance of inviting our friends. The person that invited me to the center was Mary Mitchell. Many years ago, we were doing some video production together. I think you worked at Wheelabrator and I was at Roseburg about that time, Roseburg Forest Products, and life has changed. I remember the very first metaphysician I heard was Mary Ann Williamson. When I came here, Jane Ryder was speaking. Kind of scared me, actually, because I thought, they're talking about everything I've ever thought about. So it took me another year before I came back. But I did come back. And what I really appreciate is this robe. She mentioned ordination was a gift from this community for my ordination. And I speak in Eureka and Ukiah and Pilgrim Church and different places as well as here. Do the quarterly drum group, which is coming up in October. And as Mary mentioned, the Shasta County Interfaith Forum and different community events. So ministry can be more of the tradition that Mary and Sue have embraced, or it can be out in larger community. It's very diverse now. But I am very grateful that these two are co-pastoring because I love what they're about. They inspire me. So as we begin, I want us to join together by closing your eyes and taking a long, slow, deep breath in together. And just relaxing as you exhale. It is a way of us uniting simply by joining in one breath. I'm going to ask Damien to turn down the monitor for me because I'm hearing the local radio station. So, will happiness last? I'm calling this part 2 because it's a little different than part 1 from the 9 o'clock service. What do you think? Will happiness last? And how do we create that lasting happiness? If we look at our culture today in the United States, Western civilization, what is the focus typically? What are the themes that we see in our culture? Money, success, power. We touched a button back there. So it's a little different than the spiritual path because our focus is on what? It's different than the mainstream in Western civilization. But I also think it's the very most important part because it will create the lasting health and really prosperity in a different way than we know today. We may be economically powerful in this nation, but we have a lot of people in poverty and a lot of homelessness and a lot of ails and conflict in our culture. So it may seem counterintuitive to focus on the spiritual instead of getting ahead financially, but that's not so. You notice in the reading that Damien was doing, prayer is essential. It's part of what makes us connect to happiness. When we end this lifetime, does it really matter how much money we have or how many things we have or how many toys we have? It's really about who we've become as an individual and the relationships we have. Those are the things that truly matter. And so I want us to think about this part of this talking about communion with the infinite. So I want us to be honest here. When you think of the term communion, what comes up for you? Is it a positive term, negative term? What's your experience in the world? Is it positive? Anyone have a negative experience? Good. Because in mainstream Christian churches, weekly or monthly or quarterly or annually, they actually do the ritual of communion as established through the life and legacy of Jesus Christ. And that has value. Ritual has value, doesn't it? But it was really pointing to the connection with the sacred. It means that in that communion state, we're having a very deep and intimate connection with the sacred. So today I'm asking us, where am I, each of us to ask ourselves, where am I in my practice? Where am I in communing with Spirit? How does that show up in my life? Because it also is you might say, the thermometer. We read that temperature of how much happiness we have. I was having a conversation with someone after the first service that was talking about, well, I'm not sure, about what was being shared. I think that we shouldn't have to face difficulties in this lifetime. So how many of you have never faced a difficulty in this lifetime? They are there, aren't they? So it's not that the difficulties are not going to occur in this lifetime. What matters through our spiritual practice is how we relate to and how we work with those challenges. Instead of it overwhelming us, instead of us resorting to hatred or bigotry or creating whatever form of suffering we want to talk about, it deepens us so that we become kinder, gentler, more compassionate, which really doesn't make sense in the economic world, does it? It's a very different way of perceiving the way of the world and our way in the world. So when you think about communion, let's describe what that experience is about. You think of how to describe that? He did in this reading. Do you remember what he said? Ernest Holmes described it. It's the commingling of our, do you remember? Thought with spirit, the joining. And remember, we are mind, body, and spirit. So that mind is more than the brain. And so when we commingle the physical with the, you might say, the visible with the invisible, something extraordinary happens. We call it connection. We call it reverence. We call it, when it's deep, we call it communion. And when we enter into communion, we are always changed. There's a healing that occurs no matter how small or big that change may be. It happens. So let's imagine we're having struggles with health. We have a chronic illness. We have a terminal illness. We all know that we're not going to get out of this lifetime without dying, right? There's a skeptic back there. And so the question is, how are we in that process? Can we discover God in that process as our constant companion that dwells within us, that empowers us, supports us, loves us, is constant with us? And that's intimidating when we face pain, when we face suffering, when we face loss. But when we go to our practice, the whole point of that communion is in the face of those things that, despite how challenging they may feel, we don't lose that inner peace. And it's that inner peace that creates happiness. Doesn't seem like it should, huh? The world doesn't even think it should or does. That's why they pursue wealth and power. So that what I'm asking us to do today too is, where am I in my personal spiritual journey? What percentage of me fully is in that space? What is a touchstone for me in my life? Because what's supposed to be, the way it's supposed to work, is there's not supposed to be anything between the sacred and me. That's that communion relationship. So our tendency in our culture is to put things before that. In other words, we kind of get distracted. Do you ever get distracted? Yeah. It's easy to do, isn't it? We have a busy life. So you have to think about always the call to practice, always the call to communion. And if we are in that state enough, we carry that communion state with us. We don't lose sight of that. So I want you to think about those things that come up for you that may stand between you and the sacred, you and God, you and Spirit. It can't be your spouse. It can't be your children. It's not supposed to be anything that stands between us and the sacred. And if we have something that stands between us and the sacred, we are out of balance. We have to adjust our vision, our life, so that we can be in perfect harmony with our calling. That doesn't mean you get rid of your relationships. It doesn't mean that you quit your job that supports you. It has to do with how we relate, the quality of our relationship, our perspective. Do I put that individual, or do I put that career before God? Big question, isn't it? So, looking at where am I in that journey for me? Do I do that? And if I do, I just need to make some adjustment. I see eyes going, What do you think about this? Does it make sense to you? Challenging though, isn't it? Especially when so much of our life has that focus to help children, to help our spouse, to do our job. So remember, it's not stopping those, it's changing how we relate to those things. The other thing I asked you about briefly, but I want to kind of deepen our conversation about, is authenticity. The way it's supposed to work is 100% of us is supposed to be out in the world. 100%. When I'm saying out in the world, I don't mean go downtown. What I'm saying is there a part of myself I don't allow the world to see, or that I hold back because perhaps I've been wounded in the past, or I feel unsafe, or I don't feel respected? And the spiritual journey calls us to authentic living. That's being 100% present. Not 90, not 50, but 100%. And it can feel, how's that feel when you hear that? What comes up for you? Any emotions? What emotions come up? Let me hear from you. Scary. Anxious. Absolutely. Oh. We have drugs for that. No. More exciting. Well, you know what's interesting? Remember the story of the two Buddhists walking down the road and the fierce dog comes at them. And imagine you're walking down the street with a friend and a fierce dog comes growling and snarling, racing towards you. What do you want to do? Run. So what one monk did was run towards the dog, and the dog turned and ran away. We call that, it's kind of a challenging illustration, but we call that facing our fear. And what's interesting about fear is it's a landmark. Whatever we're afraid of, it's a landmark. What kind of landmark could it be? It's a landmark of where our point of power exists. So if we move towards it, to that fear, we are launched. We are launched into the fear dissipates, and we have this enormous, great feeling of what? Damien? Strength, courage. I mean, it's empowering. And we are designed to discover that in our relationship to the sacred. You notice, too, in this, that our ego will go, I want to go the other way. So we have to train ourselves spiritually. And when we train ourselves spiritually, there's actually a brain change that occurs. Gratitude changes our brain. Meditation changes our brain. Research shows us that. Notice how you feel. And even taking a breath together and closing your eyes, we become quieter, don't we? We become more open. So that's what we're after, because when we do those things, when we face our fears, we're moving into a state of communion with Spirit instead of being driven by only our ego that says, run the other direction. So I want you to think about something else. The reading says, we long for and need a conscious union with the infinite. Do you long for that? Do you have a longing? And I would suggest to you, if you do not have a longing for that connection to Spirit, maybe the practice you've chosen or been doing isn't right for you. Try some other practices. For me, my central practice is ritual and music. Music's a strong connection, must be my Assembly of God background. That's one of the gifts from that tradition. They taught me how to enter into the sacred space within and in the physical world through worship. Every tradition I have ever encountered has taught me something. Hopefully, everything we encounter in this lifetime teaches us something. So what do you think about longing? Do you feel a longing to go into communion? Do you feel a longing to move into prayer? Or maybe I could ask it this way. Do you feel a longing to be happy? That's how you get there from here, is by those practices. What do you think? I mean, you wouldn't be sitting here if you were really focused on greed, right? But sometimes what lies before us, we become accustomed to and fail to see. We deaden our awareness, or it's just there. You know, I can remember when the meditation pavilion, the monks came and blessed it, when we first had the labyrinth. I can remember when we expanded this building, and Andrea and James asked us to go do prayers over the ground before the building was erected. I was not here for this part of the building, but I can remember praying, let this space become known as a healing space. And even though I unfortunately can't be here as much as I desire, this is home for me. This is where it all began, where my life radically changed. Where is home for you? Where is the longing? What practice makes you come alive so that you just vibrate with aliveness? There's a friend of mine who wrote a poem called Fully Alive. She says, I will not live in fear of catching fire. I choose to inhabit my days, to risk, this is my favorite part, to risk my significance. Are we willing to risk our significance? And I want you to think for a moment, think about the things that have really fed your soul. Think of one kindness someone has done for you that has meant a great deal. One kindness can be small. In fact, the smaller ones, the unexpected ones, are transformative, aren't they? So how many have a thought in their mind about what would be one of those things? Yeah. Think about those things. How did they impact you? How did they impact you? Mary inviting me here changed my life. It took years, but it changed my life. A place that I could finally, always felt a calling to be minister. This is where I could be a minister because it allowed me to create what worked for me, that honored me as the person, the individualized expression of spirit. I want you to think of things that speak to you. I love the beauty of the ocean. What do you love? What has God created that you love? I want to hear from you. Nature. What was that? Waterfalls. The river. A husband. The wife. Everything. I want you to think, though, about what specifically speaks to you and brings you awe. Because that moment of awe is communion with Spirit. Connecting what lives within us with the physical world. And aren't we transformed? We are greatly loved beyond what we can imagine. All that we see was created for us, and for us to discover our true God nature, that we would co-create with the sacred. Isn't that amazing? And so many people have passed from this plane of existence without recognizing that. But we have that as our legacy and our heritage. So as part of all that I do with music, must be part of practice. So I want you to think about being authentic, what works for you in entering communion, what distractions are getting in the way, make a decision to let go of those, and to think about the things that have spoken to you and created that awe. as you listen to this song. The name of this song is Love Like This, and it always speaks to me. So I want you to listen to it. I want you to notice the emotions that show up, and I want you to imagine this is a relationship between self and spirit. I invite you to close your eyes if you're comfortable.
When I am a wasteland, you are the water. When I am the winter, you are the fire that burns. When I am a long night, you are the sunrise. When I am a desert, you are the river that turns to find me. What have I done to deserve love like this? What have I done to deserve love like this? Your voice like a whisper, breaking the silence. You say there's a treasure, and you look till you find it. You search to find me. What have I done to deserve love like this? What have I done to deserve love like this? I cannot hurt what you so freely give. What have I done to deserve love like this? What have I done to deserve love like this? What have I done to deserve love like this? I cannot hurt what you so freely give. What have I done to deserve love like this?
Taking a breath in together. Relaxing as we exhale. We are greatly loved. beyond imagination. And that call to prayer, the call to communion, to enter into the presence of the sacred, to go within, we connect with that immense love. That is what creates the lasting happiness. Notice what you're feeling. Anybody want to share a word? Peace. Love. Emotional. Joy. Gratitude. What was that? Acceptance. The truth. That's what we are called to. Let us not forget. So let us enter into prayer. Great Spirit, Holy One, that universal love, that immense creator of beauty, that put into all that exists the energy of love. And I am the individualized expression of that creation. I recognize and know that all beings are part of that creation, and I am in relationship with each one. And my decision today is to practice that love, to recognize that I'm in communion with all of life, to broaden my awareness and my experience, to have a visceral experience of that connection and reverence. And that beauty is transformative, that love is transformative, that happiness, that communion state is healing and transformative. And for this, we give thanks. We feel so greatly loved. And as we release this prayer from this room across our planet, there's a sense of connection and love released also. And we say together, and so it is. Amen.